The first thing we're going to talk about is what is chametz. And this is a word that we find in the Torah, and it's a very important word for Pesach or Passover. And so I've got that right here. So it says in Exodus 12:15, which is one of the first places it really gives all the details about Passover, which, first of all, I should say, it's technically 3 holidays all rolled up into one. You have the first evening is Pesach. That's where in ancient times we would slaughter and eat a lamb, but now it's the night where we have our Passover Seder. And then on the second day, you have the offering of the first fruits of the barley harvest. And then for a week that kind of overshadows those, and the week in which those 2 days also occur is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or Chag HaMatzot. So when we say Passover, we kind of combine them all together into one thing, but technically Passover is like one evening. And then in the diaspora, traditionally we add an extra Yom Tov, an extra like Shabbat, basically, Sabbath day to the beginning and the end. So you get 2 first days and 2 last days. I'm getting a little echo here, so go ahead and mute yourselves if you don't mind, or I can mute all. Here we go. Oh, wait, okay, you did it. I will cancel my heavy-handed muting you all. All right, so anyhow, now that we know what we're basically talking about, this is what the Torah says. So this is really talking about Chag HaMatzot, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is 7 days long. It says, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. So already we're seeing this is very serious. You know, usually if you eat some bacon on a normal day, you're unclean until sundown. But if you eat chametz on Pesach, then you're cut off from Israel. So this is big, scary things. So this is important. So we want to find out, what does this really mean? How can we practically follow it? And what is the spiritual significance? So if you look in the Hebrew here, there are some key words that we want to define, because in English it says unleavened bread or leaven, but it's hard to tell what does that really mean. So in Hebrew it says shivat yamim matzot, which is a key word. Tochelu ach bayom harishon tashbitu seor is a key word. Mibatechem ki kol ochel chametz. Ooh, someone's talking. Okay, please mute yourself. But you can ask a question in a minute. No worries. Okay, ve'nichwata hanefesh hahi miYisrael miyom harishon ad yom hashvi'i. Oh, and chametz was another keyword. So let me go on to the next slide here where we have our keywords. So first we have the word matzah. So matzah or matzah, you're probably pretty familiar with this, the little large cracker kind of square that we have today. Those squares are machine made, and so it forms it into a little square, and there's a machine that pokes little holes in it, and those holes are actually just there to keep it from puffing up, because it can puff even though it doesn't have leaven in it. In the past, and in many Jewish communities, they're made by hand, they're round. Some places in the Middle East, you get soft matzah. But the point is, matzah is unleavened bread. So in order to understand what unleavened bread is, we have to understand what leaven is. So after Passover, I recommend you all try this. I've been getting into bread baking, and right after Pesach, the first thing I want to do is start a sourdough starter, and it's really easy. The the yeast is a bacteria that lives in the air. It's floating all around. So in order to leaven something, you don't really need a packet of yeast. You just need some flour and water, and just leave it in a bowl on the counter for like 2 or 3 days. And then you have a sourdough starter. It's this living organism, and it just eats flour, and you have to feed it. So that is the way that they would leaven bread in ancient times. They would have sourdough. So once you get this started, you don't have to do that every time and wait 2 or 3 days. You just make some dough, and then you take a little lump of dough from the previous day and you put it in today's dough, and then it adds the yeast, and your bread is leavened. And you just make sure that when you create that new batch of dough, you set some aside for the next day. So there's actually some sourdough starters that have been going for like 500 years. So you just keep doing this every day. Now there's something special for the Jewish people, which is that on Pesach or before Pesach, you have to throw away your sourdough starter. So they didn't have yeast packets or all of these different things that we think of as leavening agents now. It's just a natural leavened dough, which is just flour and water, and the yeast comes into it from the air, and it takes a few days. So that's se'or, which means leaven, which is the stuff that makes something puff up. Now, chametz is the thing that gets puffed up. So chametz, the most obvious example would be bread, but chametz is also, it's a noun as well as a verb. And so this verb can also mean fermentation. So if you think of vinegar or beer, or there's all sorts of ways that a grain could be leavened. So this system here, I mean, you can get the basic idea that you need to start fresh every year, right? You need to throw out your sourdough starter each year, and then after the holiday, you have to start fresh, which that actually kind of begs the question of, well, I guess you can't really eat chametz directly after Pesach because it takes a few days. There's actually these really interesting holidays. There's one called Mimuna, which is, I think it's from Morocco. Don't quote me on that, I might be wrong. But there's a certain Jewish community where the Jewish community sells all their chametz to their Muslim neighbors. And then after the holiday, they have a big party together and eat lots of bread together. And it's this beautiful holiday. But I don't know how they did it in ancient times. So we have some fairly vague instructions here. And according to Jewish tradition, we have some oral laws that kind of fill in the details. So one of those things which you've probably heard is that matzah has to be baked in 18 minutes. So theoretically, it takes 2 or 3 days to really get your sourdough starter really happy and lively so you can make some bread. But the rabbi said, okay, but when does it start being leavened? Like we're going to be cut off from our people if we have anything leavened. So when does it start? So they determined that if you just put flour and water together at room temperature, then it will become chametz in 18 minutes. So I'm not sure the exact details behind how they came up with that. I do know that like if it's not room temperature and it's hot or something, then it can be faster or slower. But traditionally, in order for it to not be chametz, you have to combine your flour and water and make the matzah and bake it and everything within 18 minutes so that it's not chametz and it's kosher for Passover. And the things which you can, on one hand, make matzah out of, and on the other hand, are forbidden on Passover, are chametz, are things that are made from the 5 grains, which are, let me see if I can remember this because I didn't write it down. We have wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Okay. Although, like any any good Jewish topic, there's actually some arguments about the identity of these exact 5 grains. But generally, people say those 5 are the 5. And so if you make, if any of those get wet, they start becoming chametz theoretically after 18 minutes. So that's kind of the traditional view on what chametz is. Now, there are some other more modern versions of this, like some people will look at the ingredients and say, oh, does this have yeast in it? Or even for some people, does this have baking soda in it? Although that's kind of another step removed. But it seems clear that the Torah couldn't have meant that originally, right? Because they didn't have yeast packets and they only had sourdough. So it seems like, at least to the original audience, it must have meant sourdough. Throw away your sourdough starter. So maybe there's some other modern applications about how to observe it, but as far as the original meaning for the original audience, they had sourdough and they kept it going every day for the whole year until this one time when they have to start fresh, which if you think of the idea of a fresh start, it's very ripe for some spiritual application. So we can think about that next. Okay, we have a question from Tamar. She said, so you can't have these in your house because they're considered chametz even without the moisture, or is getting them out of the house a fence? Okay, so Tamar's referring to the idea of creating a fence around the Torah. So if you add another layer of things you can't do, then you really won't do the things you actually aren't supposed to do. So the issue with that is, yes, I believe there is, it's an additional rabbinic enactment that you shouldn't use any of the 5 grains if they aren't matzah. So that's why you like have matzah meal, which is basically made into matzah, then ground up, then used as flour. And so the idea that you can't use anything from the 5 grains that's not matzah, that is an additional rabbinical enactment, but you would kind of get pretty close to that anyway if you think about it, because for instance, you take your rolled oats that you have in your cupboard. You might think, okay, well, I didn't make them into oatmeal, so they're fine. They're not chametz. They didn't get leavened. But the way you make rolled oats is you spray it with hot steam to soften it up, and then you roll it. So that's like an example. Or sometimes the same thing with like wheat flour. They'll soak it in water or spray it with steam or do something like that, so that the wheat flour is soaked in water before it's ground up to soften it up. So when you really look into it, most of the grain products we have actually have come into contact with water for a prolonged period, and therefore, according to the traditional definition, they would be chametz even though you get them as dry flour. So it's a little bit technical, but yes, so a bag of flour or a package of pasta, those things traditionally would be considered chametz. But love the question, and please, you can use a little hand raising icon, or you can send things in the chat. I love questions. I'd love for this to be interactive. Okay, let me see, 7:21. I don't remember, I had a little, I'm gonna go look at my Facebook event because I think I did a little schedule of how long I was supposed to spend on these things. So theoretically, I was supposed to start spiritual application about 5 minutes ago, but we are just fine. Okay, so let's go to the next slide here and say, what is chametz symbolically or spiritually? Okay, I gotta move my chat window here because it's in the way of the text. Okay, so this is from 1 Corinthians, which is in the Apostolic Writings or the New Testament. And Paul or Shaul. He was a what am I trying to say? A Jewish person in the Roman Empire. So he had the name Shaul and he had the name Paulos. He had a Greek name and a Hebrew name. In any case, he was writing a letter to this group of people in Corinth, and it's actually a real exciting one. They're into a lot of weird, like, sexual stuff, and he's telling them they need to stop. And so you can read all about that if you want on your own time. But he happens to use Passover and this idea of the sourdough as a metaphor. So he says, this is 1 Corinthians 5, 6 through 8, which is hopefully on your screen. Your boasting is no good. Don't you know that a little chametz leavens the whole batch of dough? Ooh, someone just scribbled on the screen. I should probably make it so people can't do that. Okay, well, that's exciting. Don't you know that a little chametz leavens the whole batch of dough? Get rid of the old chametz so that you may be a new batch of dough, just as you are unleavened. For Messiah, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us celebrate the feast not with old chametz, the chametz of malice and wickedness, but with unleavened bread, the matzah of sincerity and truth. Okay, so we just talked about what chametz literally is. It's any of the 5 grains that are left in water and become leavened. And we have this idea of this lump of dough you keep over for the next day all year until Pesach, when you should throw it out. So that's really a really ripe ground for some metaphors. So Paul says that chametz is this little thing. I mean, I don't know if they knew about bacteria back then, so now we know it's an even smaller thing than he might have thought of. It's this tiny little thing that affects a huge batch of dough. You just need this little lump, and then it puffs up this huge batch of dough. And so he's comparing this to he's talking about boasting, so the idea of being puffed up, full of yourself, pride, and then he talks about malice and wickedness. So he's talking about like sins, but not really on the grand scale of like murder or anything like that. He's talking about in your interpersonal relationships, you can have these little things that you kind of let go, like boasting and malice. And if you let them go for long enough and you hold them over every day, like that little lump of dough, then it can affect your whole life, and your whole life, you go down the wrong path and you become this wicked person. But he's saying we should celebrate Passover, because on Passover, we throw away our lump of dough and we have a fresh start. So according to Paul, that fresh start comes through Messiah, who he's comparing to the Passover lamb. So on Pesach, the original one, they slaughtered a lamb, put its blood on the door, and that saved them from the death that was coming to the firstborn. So Paul is saying that Messiah died, and his sacrifice covers over our sins, and so that gives us a new start. And so he says the matzah that we should eat is sincerity and truth. So he's really talking about it's in the middle of a whole big argument he's making, and he's using it as a metaphor, but it's a beautiful application of this concept of chametz, of this leavening that we keep over every day. And then on Pesach, we get rid of it, and we have a new fresh start. And hopefully our fresh start is one of sincerity and truth. So there's a little application on chametz. Okay, we have a question from Daphne. Daphne says, there seems to be a lot of talk about removing leaven, but less emphasis is put on the admonition to eat unleavened bread. Why is this? Is there any general view on how often it should be eaten? Once a day, every meal? Okay, great. So the main thing as far as eating matzah is you want to eat it at the Seder. And here in the diaspora, we have 2 Seders, first night and second night. So, the minimum you need is you need, your 3 pieces of matzah to put in the matzah tash. Mm-hmm. And you might need some extra matzah depending on how many people you have. So there are kind of halachic rulings on like the minimum amount of matzah and maror and the different things you should eat. But you should probably think of each person needs one square of matzah for that Seder. So each Seder that you should have 1 piece of matzah per person. And that's mainly it. There is a custom to eat like at least 1 matzah per day for the rest of the 7 or 8 day in the diaspora holiday. But the main thing is to eat the matzah during Pesach because it says really Pesach is supposed to be a lamb, but we don't have a temple, so we don't have a lamb. So it says you should eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, and so that's the most direct commandment about it. It has to do with the Seder night. Okay. Okay. Yes. So Janice asked about, is it 7 days or is it 8? Is it 8 days? So traditionally in Israel, it's observed for 7 days, and here outside of Israel in the diaspora, technically we're in exile, and we observe an extra day. So that makes it 8 days long total. But the first 2 days really are observing the first day twice. And then the last 2, the 7th and 8th day, are really kind of both counted as the 8th day. So not everyone follows that. People in Israel don't follow that. And then also depending on which movement of Judaism, like a lot of Reform or some Messianic Jews won't observe the 2nd day of Yom Tov. So that's just depending on your tradition. But for most of the world outside of the diaspora, it's 8 days. So it's just an extra day. All right, great question. And this chat seems to be very effective if you want to ask a question. So go ahead and keep those up. Now, we're about halfway through the hour, so I want to switch gears, but feel free to ask any questions you might have. I'm going to switch gears and talk about the 15 steps of the Seder. So the Passover Seder, Seder comes from the Hebrew root for order, organization, structure. So it's a very appropriate word for this meal because it has a little book that you follow to have a Seder. It goes in order. You might not think it's in order because there's all these random digressions about, and the rabbis talked all night and then they said it was time for the morning Shema, and then you're like, I don't know why they just put that in there, but we read it every year. Actually, there is a reason, but we can't really get to that right now. So here is, let me try to clear this annotation, clear all drawings. There we go, got rid of that little squiggly mark. Okay, so now we have, gotta go back. Okay, so this picture on the right is from a Haggadah that was made in 1736 in Altona, Germany. It's a very beautiful illumination, although it got a little damaged over the years. And so if you look, the little squares, there are 15 words, but they grouped some of them together, so they only have 12 pictures of these different parts of the Seder. And so over here on the left, I have those listed in transliteration, and then kind of what they are. So there's actually a traditional song that goes like, I already mispronounced the first word. Okay, it goes like, Kadesh Chatz Kapas Yachatz. So a lot of people have a custom to sing through the table of contents before you start the Seder, which is kind of a funny thing, but I like it. So So let's just go through these really quick, and please, if you want to type a question or say a question, please go ahead. So the first thing we have is Kadesh. So Kadesh or Kiddush, this is what we do at every Shabbat, at every holiday. We start out by sanctifying the occasion with wine. So I want to get a little practical here. Ideally, you should go to the store and find a kosher for Passover wine and use that. But a lot of people have discussed and written articles and guides about how this year is a little bit different than other years, and we might have to be a little more lenient on things. So first of all, I want to say that actually kosher wine and kosher grape juice are equally acceptable. It's just as appropriate to do grape juice if you prefer. And you know, if you're not able to get kosher for Passover items, well, first of all, I would say that each person should decide what standard they're going to follow before the holiday and then just stick with that. So there's some great guides out there, like for instance, the Rabbinical Assembly, which is from conservative Judaism, came out with a guide, you know, how to observe in light of COVID-19, and they have a guide for how to keep kosher for Passover. But there are a lot of different standards, and actually that particular group made a beautiful comment about how we shouldn't judge other people, especially in this time where it's so difficult to get things that are kosher for Passover, and we should leave judgment to the one who always judges mercifully. So anyway, so you need wine or juice, whatever you have access to. And then we have urchatz. So this is washing the hands without a blessing, and this is before we dip the karpas in the salt water. And so this one's a little mysterious because later in step number 6, we're going to wash the hands with a blessing before we eat bread. And this is a common Jewish tradition. Before we eat bread, we wash our hands. But this one, before we dip a vegetable in water, is very unusual. And so apparently there is an obscure halacha, an obscure Jewish law, that certain types of wet foods, if you eat them directly with your hands, you're supposed to wash your hands first, but you don't need a blessing. But if you ate it with a fork, you wouldn't need that. So anyway, a mysterious little thing. This is one of those things that they were kind of still working out in the Second Temple period. What things do we need to wash our hands before we eat? Because that's kind of a tradition that developed based on the idea of each person acting like a priest, because the priests in the temple had all of these washing ceremonies. And so they said, well, we want everyone to be like a priest. So they have kind of these traditions. So then we have, and so basically the traditional way is you have this little pitcher with 2 handles on it, and you wash your right hand, your left hand, and sometimes people do it once or alternate twice or alternate 3 times, depending on your tradition. But basically you just need some sort of container, and you need some water, and you need something to pour in, whether it be a basin or a sink. And you could use a coffee mug if you want. So then we have the karpas. So I'm used to parsley. Growing up, I always saw parsley, but there are actually different traditions on this. There's celery, onion. For Ashkenazi Jews in Eastern Europe, they didn't have a lot of green vegetables, so boiled potatoes. And then you dip that in salt water. It's not mysterious. You just mix salt and water until it tastes salty. You can do it on the stove and warm it up so it evaporates, or that's definitely the wrong word. Anyway, so it mixes up better. But that's about it. And I'm not really getting much into the symbolism, but this one, you have a symbol of spring dipped in a symbol of tears and sadness. It's very poignant. And then we have the yachatz. So you have 3 matzahs on top of each other in the matzah tash. So that's a special little pouch with 3 compartments, or sometimes they're made out of metal. If you don't have one, you just put down a napkin, put a matzah on it, put another napkin, put a matzah on it, put another napkin, put a matzah on it, and put a napkin on top. And there you go. You have an instant matzah tash. And so the yachatz is you take out the middle matzah and you break it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the bigger half, I always have to look at the directions because I always mix that up. But the bigger half becomes the afikomen. And we're going to talk about that more in number 12, tzafun. But you hide the afikomen, and the kids have to steal it and demand a ransom before they give it back. Okay, and then we have the magid, which you don't really need any special item to do this. You just need your Haggadah. So depending on which Haggadah you have, you might be a little confused by all these steps because your Haggadah doesn't necessarily have all of them. So these are the steps from the traditional Haggadah, but now we have all sorts of different ones on different themes or for different religious groups or for interfaith or social justice or you name it, there's a Haggadah for it. So some of them are, they have the traditional text and then they add commentary, but some of them, they're very short, like there's like the 30-minute Seder. In any case, the Magid in the traditional version is a lot of like super random stories that kind of build together into this retelling of the Exodus. Your Haggadah might be a little different. Some people might want to add to the Magid. It's a very praiseworthy thing to extend your telling of the Exodus. So if you just wanted to read that whole section of the book of Exodus, go for it. Okay, so 6 is Rachsa, which is the washing of the hands, and you say the blessing in Nitilat Yadayim. You're welcome, Tamar. Have a good night. Okay, so that is before eating bread. And the bread we're eating tonight, of course, is the matzah. And so we say the regular bread blessing, Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, and then we also say Al Achilat Matzah, which is the special blessing for the matzah. And then we eat it. And so that's getting ready for the meal. Like if you think about a normal kind of Jewish meal, so a Shabbat dinner, for instance, you have the blessing over the bread, or you have the blessing over the wine, and you have the blessing over the bread, and then you eat the rest of the food. So this is just, we're doing that, but we're talking a whole lot in between. So then we get to the maror, which is a bitter herb. So when I grew up, we did like the prepared horseradish in a jar. And if you look at a Seder plate, depending on which one you have, some of them have a spot for another thing called chazeret, and there's a little bit of a debate on which one is which. One of them is probably romaine lettuce, and one of them is probably horseradish, but it's, Jewish people, we like to argue about everything, so who knows which is which. So some people put romaine lettuce and horseradish in both of them, like they put 2 things in both ones. I'm used to chazeret as the romaine lettuce and horseradish as the maror, and the most traditional way of doing it is having the actual horseradish root and grating based off that, and that's more traditional than the prepared one. But whatever you can get, it's supposed to bring a tear to your eye so that you can remember the bitterness of slavery. And actually the traditional way of doing it, if you have the romaine lettuce or you have the piece of the horseradish root, is you actually dip the maror in the charoset, which is a little mixture. And really, if you're having trouble with that, don't overthink it. Chop up some apples, add some cinnamon, some walnuts if you eat nuts, and pour some wine in there and let it get a little happy, and that's it. I mean, there are a bunch of wonderful recipes you can look up, but if you're, just want the basic one, there you go. Some people add ginger, gives it a little zing. Okay, so I said I'm not talking a whole lot about symbolism, but this one I think is really poignant for the times we're living in, because you're dipping the bitter in the sweet. And so I talked about this a little bit. I just got married during this pandemic, and I was talking about the breaking of the glass at the end of a Jewish wedding. Reminds us traditionally of the destruction of the temple, but in general of this idea that lives are always a mixture of sorrow and happiness. And so we're never going to get to the time in our life where everything's just happy all the time and there's nothing sad. Hopefully at the end of the world, we'll have a time when everything is happiness. But the world we live in now is a mixture of joy and sorrow. And so this is a beautiful symbol of we're eating this symbol of bitterness and slavery and dipping it in this sweetness, the sweetness of redemption. And of course, we're eating this meal to commemorate our freedom, even though we're eating something bitter. So the Korach is number 10. So this was a tradition of Gamliel, an ancient rabbi. And the verse in the Torah says you should, when it talks about eating the Passover lamb, it says you should eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. So he said, well, I want to get it all in one bite to literally fulfill that. So you make a little sandwich. And of course you have Shulchan Orech, the set table, and that's just where you eat your meal. Some people have a tradition of starting with boiled eggs dipped in salt water. Anyway, you eat your meal. Generally, it's not traditional, at least among Ashkenazi Jews, to eat lamb on Pesach because we don't have a temple and we can't make a proper sacrifice. Some people eat brisket or chicken, what have you. I don't eat meat actually, so I do something entirely different. And by the way, the zroa, the shank bone, isn't one of the steps, but you can, I mean, it depends on how locked down you are at this point, but you know, you can get a chicken neck or a bone from a leg of lamb. Sometimes the butcher will just give them to you for free. Or actually something Rashi suggested was to use a roasted beet. It's roasted and it bleeds and you don't get confused about whether it was a sacrifice. So that's what I use, the vegetarian version. Okay, so we had the meal. Now we have tzafun, which is where the kids find the afikomen and the adults have to ransom it back so we can do the rest of the Seder. And the afikomen is supposed to be the last thing you eat, your little piece of matzah, for the rest of the night other than the wine. And so many of you are from a Messianic Jewish background, and the afikomen is very full of symbolism for you. And so, so of course, that symbolism would be that, Yeshua died and was buried, hidden away, and then he returned. And afikomen means that which comes after. It's a Greek word. And so some people take that to mean like, I have come, or it could just mean dessert. Now, this is kind of a controversial thing in the Jewish world. A lot of people are really upset when symbolism of Yeshua is seen within the Seder. But I think that this doesn't necessarily have to be controversial, because whether you believe in Yeshua or not, this is a symbol of redemption. Because this afikomen we eat, this piece of matzah, originally it would be the last bite of lamb that should linger in your mouth. So even traditional Jews who don't believe in Yeshua, they take this breaking of the middle matzah and saving it for later and eating it much later, and it's the last thing that lingers in your mouth as a sign of coming redemption, because the matzah represents our freedom, our deliverance from Egypt in history, and we always remember that. But there's actually a verse that says, no longer will you say the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, but the Lord who brought you out of the north country. So there's this looking forward to future redemption and eating this feast of Messiah at the end of time. And this Afikomen looks forward to that and remembers that we have been redeemed in the past, but we're looking forward to redemption in the future. And I think at this point, with everything that's going on, that's something we can all agree on, that we are looking forward to a better world. Okay, so 13 is Barech, which is saying Berkat Hamazon. So in the Torah it says, you shall eat and be satisfied and bless the Lord your God. And so taking that literally, it says, when you're done eating, you should bless the Lord. So traditionally, Jewish people say a grace after the meal, in addition to just saying the short blessing beforehand. So this is the traditional blessing after the meal with some extra things for Pesach, but you sing that. And number 14 is the Hallel, which is actually just part of the Hallel. So on certain holidays, we have a custom of singing a group of psalms, and that happens, let me see, it happens during Pesach, during Sukkot, actually also during Hanukkah. But in the Hallel of the Haggadah, at the end of the Magid, number 5, we say a little bit of the Hallel, and then in number 14, we say the rest of the Hallel, and we sing those psalms, and there's a bunch of different tunes you can look up. There are a bunch of wonderful videos on the internet of how to sing Hallel. And just as a side note, as a Messianic Jew, in the last Seder that Messiah celebrated in Jerusalem with his disciples, it says that at the end, it says they sang a hymn. So we don't know exactly how developed their Seder was at that point, but it seems like maybe they were saying Hallel after their Seder in the Second Temple period. And then the last part is Nirtzah, which is where you say this thing, we've done this all properly, and may we celebrate it next year in Jerusalem, and that's it. Now, one thing I didn't mention is there are 4 cups, and so you need to, stretch out your wine if you don't have much. And so number 1, obviously Kadesh, that's the first cup. But then you have a second cup at the end of, let me see, it's at the end of Magid, number 5, I guess, because you spill out the plagues and then you drink the cup. And then you have the Barech, the grace after meals. You say that holding a cup of wine, and then you drink the cup of wine after that. And then the end of Hallel, there is a 4th cup. And so traditionally these represent the 4 promises of God and the 4 stages of the Exodus out of Egypt. So that was kind of a crash course in the structure of the Haggadah. I would love to answer any specific questions you have about the structure, or just very practical questions. Okay, so I have a couple of questions here in chat already. So one of them is, what is haroset again? So haroset is that mixture of apples, and you can put honey in there and wine. There are a lot of different versions. In the Middle East, it's made with date syrup. So it's a sweet mixture. And so you kind of balance out the bitterness of the maror with the haroset. Okay, we have another question. Okay, Barbara asks, this is a challenging time to find what you need in the grocery store. So what would you say are the key items you should make sure to pick up this week to observe next Wednesday and Thursday nights? That is an excellent question, and really gets to the heart of why we're talking about this tonight. So you need some sort of wine or juice. You need some sort of fresh vegetable, parsley, celery, onion, boiled potato that you dip in salt water. So you need water and salt. You ideally would need to get at least 1 box of matzah. I got the big 5-pound pack, but at least 1 box of matzah, whatever you can find. And then let's see, I'm just going through the list here. Okay, so you need a container to pour water and a container to catch the water. So that could be a coffee mug over the sink to wash your hands, or that could be a basin of water you bring to the table and a beautiful pitcher that you pour with, and then you want a hand towel. Okay, and then a bitter herb. So horseradish in whatever form you can find it, really. Hopefully you have a Passover section at your grocery store, and that is one of the items you'll have. But you at minimum want to have some kind of bitter herb, and some would actually say that romaine lettuce is more traditional than horseradish. So you need at least some kind of bitter herb, whether it be horseradish, the root can be really hard to find, but the prepared horseradish or just romaine lettuce is probably the easiest thing to get. Okay, and then you want the charoset, which minimally, apples, cinnamon, honey, wine, walnuts. That's kind of the traditional Ashkenazi one, but you can look up recipes. And then your meal is whatever you would eat for a festive meal. So for a lot of people, that is chicken or brisket. I'm vegetarian, so I'll make a kosher Passover meal that doesn't have meat. Traditionally meat is associated with rejoicing because it's something expensive that people couldn't always eat. So you eat meat to show this is a really special occasion. And then the rest doesn't really need much. So, okay, if I'm going to sum that up, wine or juice, parsley, salt, water, matzah, romaine lettuce, apples, and cinnamon is your real bare bones. Okay, let me see how we're doing. Okay, so we're running down on time. I can probably stay a little extra if you have extra questions though. Okay, another question. I would love some clarification. There are two observances that we are embracing. The 14th of Nisan is the Seder meal. Then on the 15th of Nisan, the commencement of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This Pesach, the 14th of Nisan, is on Wednesday, so presumably the Seder would be that same evening. However, doesn't our days start at sunset the night before? So how does the 14th does the 14th actually just start on Tuesday night? And did I hear you right that in the diaspora we have 2 nights so you can observe the Seder, which would be the first 2 nights? Okay, great. And also Barb says, can I send out a list? Yeah, there's actually a list on realsimple.com. I will send out the link when I get a chance. Okay, so here's the deal. This would be better with a calendar, I guess. So maybe I will stop this sharing and get a calendar real quick, because that will be the easiest way to explain it. Okay. Bear with me one moment while I get my Jewish calendar here. Okay, we are going to April. Okay, and now I need to share my screen again. Okay. Share. Okay, I hope you can all see this now. Okay, so, well, it's a little unhelpful because it has the Gregorian calendar, but it doesn't have the dates on the Hebrew calendar. But anyway, you are correct. The 14th of Nisan starts on Tuesday at sundown, and the 15th starts at Wednesday at sundown. So we don't have time to really dig into the text, but in the text it says between the suns is what it says, which is interpreted by some as twilight or different ways. But basically, it's on the 14th between the suns, which is taken to mean that you start towards the end of the day on the 14th, and then it spills into the 15th, so the lambs would be slaughtered on the afternoon of the 14th. So that would be Pesach itself is that evening. Now, starting that evening, okay, somebody just signed into my account. That's disconcerting. Okay, well, there we go. I hope you can all still hear me. Okay, okay, so from that evening, which is the 15th of Nisan, so the 9th here on this calendar, that would be the first day of Pesach. From Wednesday evening to Thursday evening, that's the first day. And so the Seder is on Wednesday night. And then the second Seder in the diaspora is Thursday night, and the second day goes until Friday night. Okay, hope you're tracking with me here. So then on the tail end of things, in Israel, if you just were observing the 7 days, the last day would start on this Tuesday night here and go until Wednesday night. But in the diaspora, there's the extra day starting Wednesday night and ending Thursday night, and then Passover is totally over. And there's actually a custom for the last day of Passover to have Seudat Mashiach, which is a Hasidic custom of having a Seder that anticipates the arrival of Messiah, which can also be very poignant as Messianic Jews. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. Now I have to find what happened to my chat window because I need to see your chats. Okay, let me see. Okay, we're just about out of time here, but let's answer a few more things. Okay, it says lots of great info, thanks. How long has a general order displayed on the left? Okay, so we did have that on the screen. But in practice, was it pretty much in place during the Second Temple era? Okay, I do not know that for sure. I mean, obviously, I think the earliest record of a Passover Seder we have is actually from the New Testament and the record of Yeshua's Seder, which is also known as the Last Supper. So I don't think we really have that much information on what they had at that time. It seems like there were multiple cups of wine. It seems like they sang after the meal. So it seems like they had some of the elements, but we don't really know how much of it they actually had at that time. Okay, a couple people said goodbye. Okay, 4 cups. Let me get back to that. Okay, someone's asking me if I follow the 8 days or just the 7th day, 7 days. Okay, personally, I try to observe the extra days for the holidays just because that's traditional. Other people feel different ways. Like I said, different movements of Judaism do or don't follow those extra days. Okay. Okay, so asking which days are Shabbats. So let me get that calendar back out. So, okay, so on this calendar, it has the days that are a Shabbat in yellow. So if you were observing just 7 days, this April 9th and April 15th would be a day of rest. But if you observe the extra days in the diaspora, then the 9th and 10th are a Shabbat, and the 15th and 16th are a Shabbat. And then, of course, you have Saturday as a Shabbat. So in this particular case, the beginning of the holiday is a 3-day Yom Tov, which is quite an undertaking. Well, I mean, I guess you just have to rest a lot, but it takes a lot to prepare for it. Okay, let me get out of this so I can see my chat again. Okay, cup of Elijah. Okay, so let me pull up the 4 cups, and then we can also talk about the cup of Elijah. Okay, I don't want to get it wrong, so I am going to get a list here so that we can all be on the same page. Okay. Here we go. Bear with me. Okay. Now, I wouldn't trust Wikipedia for everything, but, you know, it's going to do for right now. Okay, and I will share my screen. I apologize for the tedious waiting here. Okay, so here we go. You can all look at Wikipedia with me. So as I mentioned, there's a cup that goes with Kadesh, there's a cup that goes with Magid, there's a cup that goes with Barech, and there's a cup that goes with Hallel. And these come from Exodus 6 through 7. And so they're associated with the 4 promises. I will bring you out, I will deliver you, I will redeem you, and I will take you So sometimes it's called the cup of deliverance. Oh, wait. Oh, that one's deliverance. Okay, now I'm forgetting. Well, someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, one of those is deliverance, and then the third one is redemption. The fourth one is acceptance, which goes along with Nir Tzah, which is, you know, the acceptance or conclusion of the Seder. So I'm not sure all of what you're asking as far as the symbolism. Many Messianic Jews would associate the promise of "I redeem you" with when it says Yeshua took a cup after supper and says, "This is the new covenant." And so obviously the theme of redemption goes along with Messiah redeeming us. So that would be that cup. Is what a lot of Messianic Jews would remember by that. Okay, as far as Kos Eliyahu, the cup of Elijah, so that is, well, okay, let me get back to my order here, and that'll be helpful for everyone, I think. Okay, so let's go back to, you get to see all the slides. Okay, there we go, 15 steps of the Seder. So the cup of Elijah is, it's right before, it's after Hallel, I think, actually. Ooh, now I'm telling you misinformation. Okay, anyway, it's towards the end of the Seder. Just follow what's in your Haggadah. And basically, this is part of what I was talking about with the Afikomen, is that the Seder focuses on past redemption and future redemption. So if you read at the end of Malachi, the prophet, it says that I will send you the prophet Elijah, and he's supposed to herald the coming of the Messiah. So we're remembering the past redemption out of Egypt. We're also looking to the future redemption through Messiah and the world to come. And so traditionally, Elijah, is supposed to be the person who announces that that time is about to start. And so there's this tradition of leaving a cup for Eliyahu. In a lot of like rabbinical tales, there are stories of Eliyahu visiting people's homes and being seen various places. And, you know, people ask him, is Messiah coming? And so we hope and pray that this will be the year that Eliyahu will come to the Seder and will say that Mashiach, that Messiah, is on the way. And so that's why we leave the cup for Eliyahu, and we sing Eliyahu Hanavi and open the door. And in a more recent tradition that some people have is also to have a cup of Miriam, which is filled with water to represent the tradition of Miriam's well, and that along with Moses and Aaron, Miriam was actually an integral part of the redemption from Egypt. Okay. Oh, look, I have chat over here too. Okay. Are there more? Okay, that's a picture, I guess. Okay, I guess Barb shared a Haggadah. Okay, what is my favorite Haggadah? Well, I don't know which one Barb shared. I mean, there are definitely some ones in print that are excellent. There is the New American Haggadah, which I love, which is like the traditional text with some commentary. If you're looking for a short one that you can print out, the Jew Belong, Jew Belong Haggadah is a PDF and you can print it. I can't necessarily endorse it for everyone because sometimes they get a little political and it might offend some people, but you can skip over that part, and it's an excellent short Haggadah. There are a lot you can find online. Of course, there are Messianic Haggadot, there are Haggadot of all different themes. There's also a website, haggadot.com, where you can take the building blocks of the Haggadah and make your own and print it out. So there are a lot of good options. Of course, a lot of people have gotten their Haggadah by going to the grocery store and getting the Maxwell House Haggadah, but I don't know. Grocery shopping has change a little bit in our present circumstances. But those are my thoughts on Haggadah. Just so you know, Passover is exactly 1 week from tonight. So the first Seder is in exactly 1 week at around this time in the evening. So start cleaning your house. I didn't mention this. I should say, by the way, that dirt isn't chametz. So even if your house is not spotless, it's really just to get rid of anything leavened that's bigger than an olive. So if your floor is dirty, but there isn't a piece of bread bigger than an olive, you're actually fine, and don't go too crazy. Any other questions? I'm about to sign off. Thank you everyone for coming. Everybody have a good night.